Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to ask you to do one more calculation in terms of measuring incidence. But now, instead of measuring incidence of death, I want you to measure a different outcome, incidence of coronary heart disease among the men and among the women. Well, the problem here is that in the Framingham data set, as in real life, if you start following people for an outcome other than death, you run the risk of having problems due to two causes. One is losses to follow-up. You intend to have these people contact you and let you know if they develop coronary heart disease, but some people might have moved away from the Framingham data set. And they might have, and the investigators in the Framingham data set may have lost contact with the people. So for some people in the data set, we might not have full follow-up. For other people, we might have a problem that's somewhat related, but is really due to a different cause. Some people might develop an event, like dying from cancer, that makes them no longer at risk for developing coronary heart disease. Once you're dead, the good news is you can't develop other diseases. But in terms of epidemiologists, we don't know your true follow-up time for that other event, coronary heart disease, because something made you no longer at risk before you could have developed heart disease, namely you died from a different cause. So here's what the data looks like. You have the same data here, males and females. We had 1,944 men. We had 32,763.95 person years observed from those. Those are person years either until a person developed coronary heart disease, that made them no longer at risk for developing heart disease, or they were lost to follow-up, or they developed another event like dying from another cause that made them no longer at risk for developing heart disease, or the study ended 24 years later. So we have incomplete follow-up. Out of those 32,763.95 years, we observed 710 cases of coronary heart disease among men. We have similar answers now for the women and the total population. So here's your questions that I want you to think about. First of all, how would you measure incidence of coronary heart disease among men, and how would you measure it among women? So now that you've thought about this for a minute, whether you'd report either a cumulative incidence or an incidence rate, let me give you at least some more information, or at least my opinion on this. As I say, the problem is with these losses to follow-up, or losses due to competing risks. They make it not feasible to validly measure cumulative incidence, because not all participants were at risk for the full 24 years of follow-up, either because they were lost to follow-up or they were no longer at risk from dying from another cause. These are the two reasons that a person might have incomplete follow-up that make it impossible for us to measure a cumulative incidence directly by just taking the number of cases of coronary heart disease divided by the number of people. Well, what do we have to do in that situation? We have to report incidence rates. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is to use just the person time that was observed among the men and women and calculate the incidence rates of developing disease, in this case coronary heart disease, among men and among women. So here are the questions I want you to calculate now. What's the incidence rate for developing coronary heart disease, first among all participants, then among just men, and then among just women? So why don't you do those calculations, and the next time we'll get together, I'll show you my calculations and see if our answers agree with each other. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Last time we were together, I asked you to calculate incidence rates. We made the argument that when you have losses to follow-up or losses due to competing risks, you cannot measure incidence, cumulative incidence directly, but you can still measure incidence rates. And that's what we want you to do. So here is the data I gave you, looking at the incidence of developing coronary heart disease during the 24 years of follow-up. The incidence rate now, among all participants, we had a grand total of 80,925 years of follow-up among all participants, and 1,240 of them developed coronary heart disease during those periods of follow-up. So the incidence rate would be 1,240 divided by the 80,925.15. Again, you have to specify time, person years of follow-up. You can do the same calculations for men and for women. For men, you observe 710 cases of coronary heart disease Out of the 32,763.95 person years of follow-up, and among women, it's the 530 cases of coronary heart disease divided by the 48,161.2 person years, again, of follow-up. So if you do the math, divide the numerators by the denominators, turns out that the incidence rates for developing coronary heart disease among men is 2.17 cases for every 100 person years. Among women, it's lower, 1.1. And among everybody, it's 1.53 cases for every 100 person years. And again, notice that the incidence rate for everybody falls in the range. It's an average of the incidence rate for men and women. Next time we get together, we're going to take this one step further. We're going to try to come up with a number that measures the association between the risk factor, males versus females, and the outcome, the incidence rate. We're going to take these numbers, incidence rate for men, 2.17 cases for every 100 person years, and the incidence rate for women, 1.1 for every 100 person years, combine them into something called a measure of association. That's the next series of lectures. Hope to see you then.